for having me here. It's a great privilege to be here amongst you. I was talking to Hari and Professor here, and we really, this is one of the unique institutes which focuses on energy research and management. And this is really need of the hour for India to have so much focus on energy, with energy deficit that we have, the kind of energy revolution that we are going through. So what I would like to cover today, and let's make this as informal as possible. So if you have any questions even during the presentation, if you don't understand or if I'm going too fast or too slow, let me know. But this is what I'm going to cover today is what are the trends in renewable energy, which is really my focus, and what are the policy and technology initiatives that government across the world, but specifically India, has taken, and what is the impact, how are we going to solve the challenges in renewable energy as a result of that. Before I begin, let me give you a little bit of background about myself, and thank you for the kind introduction. I did my bachelor's in mechanical engineering, then I did my PhD in engineering, again focusing on mechanical engineering and materials engineering. I joined GE Global Research in New York, where I was there for about 6 years. I was doing product development for energy and aviation. Then I moved to a business role, where I was a product manager for wind energy again based out of New York. I relocated back to India about 2 years ago as a marketing manager for renewable energy for India. So my focus actually increased. I was focusing on wind energy services. Now I focus on entire renewable energy, but the regions that I cover, I used to look at globally. Now I focus only on India and regions around India. So with that, let me go to the next slide. And what you will see, this is kind of the agenda that we'll go through. And although I'm covering the topics generically, you will see a lot of references to GE. So GE, since I've worked there for 10 years, 11 years, so I'll use GE more as a case study. What are the things GE has done in each of these areas, what kind of policy advocacy GE does, and what type of technology improvements we have initiated to tackle challenges in renewable energy. But in general, what I'll cover is I'll give you a brief about GE Energy. I will talk about what is the electricity scenario. Then I'll focus on renewable energy. And then what are the challenges in renewable energy. I will cover wind in more detail, and then I'll also talk about solar. Then we can go through policy and technology initiatives that different countries and different companies have taken, and then I'll summarize. Now, I'm assuming that you have some background or you know a little bit about renewable energy. So if this is too advanced, please let me know. And in some cases, it may be too preliminary for those of you who have worked with renewable energy. So a little bit about GE Energy. GE Energy again is a global company. We have three main verticals. One is called oil and gas. The second one is power and water, which is probably the biggest. And the third one is called energy management, which deals with transmission and distribution. Now, power and water, which is $30 billion type of business globally, has, if you look at this slide and if you look at the bottom half, it shows you what are the legacy or heritage businesses that we were involved in. And this is not only about GE. This is all power companies across the world. If you look at Siemens, if you look at Alstom, a lot of these companies. We used to do thermal, gas turbines, steam turbines, coal power plants, natural gas fired power plants. We used to do services for those power plants to make sure they are available. They are, they're making right amount of efficiency, giving you right amount of efficiency. We are doing aeroderivatives. These are aviation engines, aero engines for land applications. So a lot of cruise ships will have these type of engines where you need, immediate power. So you don't have time to ramp up like a gas turbine. You would use an aeroderivative. And then nuclear, which is again has been around in many countries. There is some activity in India now. But what has happened over the last 10 years is the world has shifted. And I have a couple of slides to show you that. But the world has shifted. Now we are looking at wind as a main business, solar as again a mainstream business. We are looking at water technologies. And these power and water is much more applicable to India than many other parts of the world, because those are the challenges that we are going to face. And then the fourth business that we are focusing on now is gas engines, where we are using biomass, biogas, natural gas to fire these gas engines. If you focus, out of all these businesses, if you focus on renewable energy and what does GE do in renewable energy, we have wind, we are first or second in terms of install base. We kind of compete with Vestas, and it's neck and neck. So we are definitely, in terms of North America, we are the biggest install base. Our install base today is 17 gigawatts. So we have, sorry, not 17 gigawatts, 17,000 turbines. So which is probably 25 gigawatts across the world. We have, the two areas that we focus on is how do we improve efficiency of our wind turbines, and I have one slide on that, and how do we improve customer value. At the end of the day, the customer will buy our machine if he sees that we give him the lowest cost of electricity, cost of generation, or highest rate of return. So that's what we focus on. On solar, GE's focus is on thin film technology. Now, just to give a little bit of background, we have solar thermal and solar PV. I'm assuming you know a little bit about that. So out of solar PV, we are focusing on solar or thin film technology. Again, the focus is how do we bring down the cost of electricity, cost of generation. And power electronics is one of our focus areas. So weak grid, like India, how do we make sure that our turbines will work well with weak grid? The third focus area after wind and solar is services. And services is gaining more importance now, because wind, when a developer looks at a wind project, he's looking at 20-year type life cycle, and for solar it's 25 years life cycle. So he's not only building a power plant, but he has to actually manage the asset for so many years. So services, asset management is becoming very important. And we have, we again focus on how do we improve efficiency. If you are developing new technology, how can we apply that new technology to the existing product? And the last piece is financial services. Wind and solar, the biggest challenge developers are facing is project financing, because a lot of this is upfront investment. If you compare thermal with renewables, the big difference you will see is in thermal you have split between capex and opex. In renewables, it's all capex. There is no fuel cost. Once you build the plant, it's free. So that's a big shift. What does that mean? That means the developer has to put in a lot more money upfront. So project financing becomes that much more challenging. At 8.5%, LIBOR, 13% is the interest rate that developers are getting today. How many of them are going to be able to do a project, because they will need few more points above 13% to make the project viable. But with all that, we have a financial services arm, and if you Google Energy Financial Services at GE, we have done several deals just last 2 weeks, including a couple with the Indian businesses. So we have about $20 billion in assets across the globe. And this is just an overview of GE Renewable Energy and where we stand. In terms of electricity scenario, I think I'm preaching to the choir because you guys know about this already. So globally we are going to look at doubling the demand by 2030. In India we are looking at doubling the demand by 2020. So we are even on a faster pace. What are the macro drivers for these demands? Now, population is clearly one driver. We are also looking at, the standard of living for the population is going up. 7 billion babies going to be born today in Uttar Pradesh. So, but all of them want to live better. So it's not only population, it's standard of living. It is also, you are seeing digital economy coming into place. All of us get on the internet when we want to buy something. All of us want to, have sort of the best systems, best cars, things like that. So it's a digital automated economy. All that is going to need power. So when you look at all those micro drivers, the electricity demand is going to continue for several years or several decades. If you look at what does it mean in terms of, but there are going to be some downsides to that electricity demand. if we go with our heritage businesses, it is going to create emissions, it is going to create global warming, it is going to create unsustainable economy, something that we cannot sustain for decades to come. So what we should do, or what we have to do, is move from heritage businesses to more of diverse energy solutions. If people ask me when I visit customers or even when I'm at a conference, will wind or solar ever replace gas turbines? It will not. It will provide peak power, but you have to have some base power. So it is not going to be only, so that's why we have the plus sign there. It is not going to be this replaced by this. It's going to be this plus this, with more focus shifting towards renewable energy. If you look at what is happening in renewable energy and what does this all mean? We looked at macro drivers. We said that to reduce emissions, global warming, we need to have renewable energy. So in the last 10 years, what has happened is renewable energy has grown at a 30% compounded annual growth rate. We have gone from 4 gigawatt to 42 gigawatt, and this is actually 09. So we have added 10 gigawatts more in the last 2 years. So the world today overall electricity capacity is 3,500 gigawatt. This is just a calculation globally. If you want to have 1% shift more towards renewable, it means the world has to spend $100 billion more. Just to give you an idea of what kind of investments are required. I talked about capex. Same thing with solar. If you want to move 1% towards solar, you are going to need that 700 billion number is a year old. So I think that has come down to about 400 billion, but it's still a big number. I'll give you a scenario for India, and it's not on the slide, so just be with me when I explain. We have 2.5 gigawatt of wind that is getting installed every year. That means the project investment is about $3 billion every year that is happening in India. We have 250 megawatt of solar getting installed in India this year, and hopefully it's going to grow. 250 megawatt of solar requires 1 billion of project investment. So 3 billion for wind, 1 billion for solar. $4 billion are getting invested in India for renewable energy this year. People are talking about 5 years from now, we'll be installing 5 gigawatt of wind and 2 gigawatt of solar every year, which requires close to $15 billion of investment. So just the amount of investment that has to happen, and that's why people like us, we have to be we have to think strategically. We have to look at policy and technology interventions that are needed to bring down that cost to make this more viable. But nonetheless, that's the kind of magnitude of investment that will go into Indian renewable energy sector. In India today, we are seeing 4% penetration. Although our we are at 180 gigawatt total installed capacity, 14 gigawatt is wind, another few gigawatt is 18 gigawatt is total renewable. So we are at 10% of installed capacity, but in terms of electricity that's going into the grid, it's about 4%. The National Action Plan, as you would know, is to get to 15% by 2020. So again, I'm just giving you big picture of renewable energy, where we are going, how much investment is needed. So you will appreciate why it is so much important to have the right policies and the right technology. So now that you have looked at renewable energy and what is kind of involved in renewable energy, what does it look like? I'll provide one picture from US, and then I have another slide on Spain, just to give you a third-party view. And then we can also talk about India. So in terms of wind, if you look at, we started at 20 cents, that's about 10, 12 rupees. In US at 85, it came down to close to 3, 4 rupees. And I think we are seeing similar pattern in India. So this is actually translate, you can translate this to India as well. What made it bring down to this level? Drop of four times. It's primarily because of technology. We moved from kilowatt class machines to megawatt class machines. Better, fixed speed turbines to variable speed turbines. There are a lot of technological advancements. Turbine size, as I mentioned, and project scale. Initially, one turbine, few turbines, and now there are projects that are gigawatt scale projects. There is one that GE put out in Oregon in US, which is a gigawatt kind of project. So these are sort of, these are big projects. Where does wind compare when you talk about this type of technological improvement? Where does wind compare? If you look at natural gas, which is at 6 cents or 3 rupees, coal, which is 7.5. In India, this situation is reversed because we don't have natural gas. We have some domestic coal, but otherwise we are in a similar pattern. Wind is getting to a point where it can compete with natural gas and coal, and you see that even in India today. Even with the 3 rupee tariff, people are ready to put in wind projects. But what does wind buy you, or what does wind, biomass and solar, all three buy you? They buy you fixed cost of electricity because there is no OPEX. Fluctuations in fuel price don't affect you. They buy you energy security. You don't have to depend on Middle East oil or oil from other countries. You have carbon-free generation and you have domestic solution. So that's what wind gets you. If you look at Spain, which is, and this is a study done by A.T. Kearney, this is in public domain, it gives you, what I showed you was more of a current snapshot. This gives you some type of a long-term view. So this one is a solar thermal, the top curve is solar thermal, and this is a range because you can't predict exactly where it's going to lie. But the top curve is solar thermal, the darkish curve is solar PV, and then these two lines are wind onshore and wind offshore. What this shows you is, and I'll just qualify that statement, the solar thermal is non-dispatchable solar thermal. So the storage technology has not been considered. The problem with renewable obviously is none of that is dispatchable. You cannot predict when you are going to, you can predict probably a week in advance, maybe definitely a day in advance, but not months in advance. So you can make it dispatchable. The wind and solar PV can be dispatchable using batteries. Solar thermal can be dispatchable using molten salt. But this analysis is with non-dispatchable view. And what it shows is by 2020, 2025, all these technologies will be around 7 to 8 euro cents. So which is, again, getting comparable to your conventional power generation. Now, I'll shift gears. We'll now talk about, so I've hopefully given you a baseline for why renewable energy, what type of investment, where we will be. Now we'll shift gears and look at from a project developer point of view. All this is great. Renewable energy sounds like, solution for world hunger, all the world's problems. But when you get to the ground level, this is all armchair economics. You're sitting in an office and drawing up all scenarios. But when you get to real, you get to the ground, you go and talk to a developer, you go and meet state officials. What are the challenges that renewable energy is facing? And as I mentioned, the biggest one that we hear about is project viability. High cost of money. You have banks taking a very, very risk-averse approach. You have some banks like Asian Development Bank, IDFC, IFC, which are funding, but private banks are taking a very risk-averse approach, especially given what happened with the mortgage, crisis. So project financing is a big challenge. Land availability. Today, if you look at wind, primarily it is happening wherever the wind speeds are good. Like initially Tamil Nadu, all the developments happened in Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra. Then it slowly started happening in Karnataka, Gujarat, Rajasthan, now Madhya Pradesh. But sooner or later, land is going to become an issue. We have limited amount of land. These are large-scale projects. This is even bigger concern for solar because in wind at least, and I don't know how many of you have visited a wind turbine, but in wind turbine you actually have to buy a footprint. So when you put a wind turbine, if you have seen a wind turbine in a picture, the amount of land that you have to actually acquire is about 1.5 acres. Between two wind turbines, you may need like few acres of land, but you don't have to acquire that land. Farmers can still do farming between wind turbines. And if you look at pictures in Europe, you will see farmers doing farming and things like that. So But in solar, you are pretty much going to cover the entire land. So land availability will become a big challenge. Policy enforcement, one of the things that when I talk to my global counterparts and when we have the planning sessions, one of the questions that get asked is, but India is so weak in terms of policy enforcement. It's not that we have bad policies, we actually have very good policy makers. I mean, we probably have the smartest policy makers around the world, I think. But it's the enforcement where we are weaker because, there are so many stakeholders. There is farmers' agitation will back off. I'm not saying right or wrong, I'm just saying it is somewhere where we haven't stepped up. So, policy enforcement, especially in case of renewables, and I'm not described all the policy instruments, but renewable purchase obligations is basically saying that every state has put in certain amount of renewable purchase obligations. But will all the states enforce them? So far we have seen good signs. Some of you may be looking at these renewable energy credits and how the trading is going on. Last 8 months of trading, we have seen very good signs that the renewable purchase obligations will be enforced. But that's a challenge. Local supply chain. Do we have to have $20 billion investment? Will the components come from globally, China, or will they be made locally? Do we have entrepreneurs? Do we have people who are willing to make some components in India? Infrastructure. When I say infrastructure, I'm using it in a very loose way. It includes power evacuation. How do you get? Another challenge with renewables is it's not close to, it's remote areas typically. So how do you get from those remote areas power back to where the load centers are? India is in a way in a better place. If you look at US, a lot of development, a lot of good wind sites are in the Midwest, as they call it, the middle part and in Texas. Whereas all the load centers are Western Shore, which is California, or Eastern Shore, which is New York, Washington DC, Philadelphia, Boston. So for them, that challenge is even more. For us, at least, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Gujarat, Rajasthan, we have a lot of areas where the transmission doesn't have to be that long, but it still is going to be a challenge. Resource measurement, I'm sorry. How do you, accurately measure wind resource, solar resource? You don't have, wind resource, there is CWET, Center for Wind Energy Technology out of Chennai, which has 500 stations where they measure resources. But they measure at 20 meter and 50 meter. Whereas all wind turbines today are 80 and 100 meter. So, upgrades, they have to upgrade their stations. There are only, I think, half a dozen solar resource measurement stations. How do we get to a point where, we can do it across the country? So resource measurement, component testing. For critical components like blades, gearboxes, sometimes there is no testing facility available in India. You have to send it across the waters, to UK, or that has to change if you have to go to the next scale. And then last is skilled labor force across the spectrum. You need people who can fix turbines, who can service them, who can do remote monitoring and kind of remotely fixing the faults. You need engineering people, you need management people, strategic management. You need product development people who will develop Indian products or India-focused products. So with those challenges, that's why the role of policy and technology becomes important. I will just, the reason I chose policy and technology is because renewable energy, out of all businesses, is one where policy has the biggest influence. I mean, nuclear may be the other one, healthcare may be the other, one more business where policy plays a big role, but renewable energy is, without policy, there is no renewable energy. And I think I have a slide on that, but without policy, there is no renewable energy, so policy is clearly one. And technology, I showed you the cost of electricity, how that can dramatically come down. And in Spain example, how it still has to come down. So those two are probably, in my mind, the biggest drivers. So I just have two quick slides on policy. And is it too fast? So in US, the policy, so this kind of describes different countries, what policy instruments have they used. If you look at US, which is, US and Germany, in my mind, are kind of the leaders in renewable energy so far, what they have done. So if you look at the US, the policy instruments they have used are production tax credits and investment tax credits. Investment tax credit means you get some money back right away, 30%. So if you invest $1 million, you get $300,000 back, which reduces your upfront expense, your levelized cost of electricity comes down. Or the second instrument is production tax credit. The more you produce, the more you would get back, which encourages better efficiency machines. So those are the two that US has used. They also have state renewable portfolio standards, which is similar to renewable purchase obligations. These are state mandated, similar to India. Canada has looked at the national wind production incentive. Brazil has very unique way. They do auctions. So they just went through second auction. First auction, I think second auction was like 4 gigawatt or something like that. So this is similar to what we see in solar in India. So it's like reverse bidding type of auction. And whoever can provide the best cost of electricity will win. If you look at Europe really focused on FIT, free tax. And again, we can debate on which incentive is better, but they are all, have worked in those specific geographies. If you look at, and one more thing about Europe is grid bonuses. I mean, Europe has started installing wind turbines since 80s, late 80s. So they have created a grid bonus structure where if you upgrade your turbine, if you put new technology in, whether it's grid integration, whether it's new rotors, whatever it is, you will get a bonus. So that has worked very well in Europe. If you look at China, China, everything, once you set a goal, you have to abide by that goal. So they have set goals for wind and solar. The unfortunate part is that doesn't always encourage efficiency or performance. So you see in China, a lot of turbines are not even connected to the grid. They're installed but not connected. So that's something that they will have to, and I know they're working on getting over that. And in India, and we'll go into more details, but we have renewable purchase obligations, we have feed-in tariffs, we have generation-based incentives, and we have accelerated depreciation. So we are using kind of combination of US, Europe, and solar. We are using like an auction. So we have combination of various instruments. And I think again the policymakers have done a fantastic job of putting these policy instruments together. They have done a lot of studying. I don't know how many of you have interacted with MNRE or CERC, but I mean these guys are smart people. So they, when I talk to Dr. Pramod Dev from CERC, he knows what they're doing. So it's again the enforcement piece where we have to be stronger. Now what we do in terms of policy advocacy is we have advantage of having people across the globe, policy people. So we take best practices, we suggest that to MNRE or CERC that these things have worked well. Maybe you want to look at that. We give them case studies. We also write position papers on why should there be, no local content requirement in solar. Why should they allow developers to choose the best technology and let the economics drive the local content requirement, not policy. So, we write position papers like that. We also engage with trade associations. In case of wind, there is Indian Wind Turbine Manufacturer Association. In solar, they are forming a similar association. There is developer association as well. So we interact with them and again put together policy positions. I'll cover this slide very quickly because we talked about a lot of the instruments that US has used. 2 cents extra if you use wind energy. 30% investment tax credit can go for one of the two. What I just want to highlight 2 points on this slide. One, when they had production tax credit and when they didn't have production tax credit, you can see the dip in the amount of investments. So that's why policy is very important for renewable energy development across the world. In general, I think after they made the policy stable, production tax credit, I think the wind investment and the wind installations have continued in a very stable way. They are, between the RPS, the renewable portfolio standards have really helped them to, when 22 states signed up, they were looking at 44 gigawatts. As more number of states in US have signed up, we are looking at 50 gigawatt of wind being installed in US. So this is again, something like 4 or 5 gigawatt per year type of number. So if you now look at wind energy policies in India, or wind energy policy and technology, because that's kind of the theme. So in terms of policy interventions, what have we done? We started with accelerated depreciation for last several years, where we encourage people to put in wind turbines, to get tax depreciation on their profits. So a lot of fertilizer companies, textile companies jumped in. They had two things in mind. One, to use wind energy as the captive power. Second, to use the depreciation to offset their profits. That worked well, but again, just like China, the performance was very poor. So then government decided that they needed to go to generation-based policies, where you get paid if you generate. So they put in GBI, generation-based incentive, which worked for both wind and solar. But for wind, that really drove new set of developers. Before it, as I mentioned, it were process industries that were jumping in. Now it is developers who want to own and operate the wind turbines. Utility companies who want to set up wind facilities. There are still industrial consumers who want to do wind energy. The second policy instrument that we have used effectively is feed-in tariffs. If you look at Maharashtra, the tariff is 5 rupees 67 paise. If you look at Rajasthan, it's 4 rupees plus. I think Andhra, Gujarat are going to go through some revisions very soon. So feed-in tariffs have again worked well. You have seen huge amount of investment in Maharashtra. Once the tariff was, they followed CERC norms, tariff norms. The third piece, which I think is the future of India, is the renewable energy certificates and renewable purchase obligations. We will, today it's 5% penetration, we have to get to 15%. So all the states have put in obligations in line with the National Action Plan. And if you look at Tamil Nadu, just a quick example, if you look at Tamil Nadu, the feed-in tariff is 3 rupees 70 paise. But if you look at what a developer can make out of renewable energy certificates, he can make the coal tariff of 2 rupee 50 to 2 rupee 37 paise and renewable energy certificates which are trading at, let's say, 3 rupees. So he can make 5.5 rupees as opposed to 3 rupees 70 paise, which is the feed-in tariff. So you can see now he has much more incentive to put in a project. In terms of technology developments, what are the challenges or what are the developments that are happening in India? We are seeing that wind low-speed sites are getting developed. Originally Tamil Nadu sites were all 7 meters per second. Wind speed is measured in terms of meter per second. 7 meters per second was where a lot of projects happened. Now the speed is at 6 meters per second. You cannot do project once it is below 4.5, 5. So now the sites that are getting developed are between 7 and 5. So we need turbines that actually can harvest maximum energy out of those low wind energies, low wind speed sites. And also, as I mentioned, these projects are built for 20 years, 25 years into solar. So you have to focus on availability. Because one other thing that is very interesting about renewable energy is availability is very important, because if your turbine is down for any reason, you are losing revenue, you are losing electricity, because the fuel is free. So availability becomes even more important in case of renewable energy. In case of gas turbines, if your turbine is down, you can stop putting natural gas in and you're okay. In wind, the fuel is coming anyway, so you better have your turbine running all the time. A quick how should I say, impact of all those policy instruments. We are about 14 gigawatts now. We will be at 50 gigawatts if we continue along the path. So in next 10 years, we'll be putting 4 gigawatt, 5 gigawatt by the second half of the decade. We are also looking at renewable energy credits. Again, will become a big piece. And what all these policies are driving is they're driving better performance in terms of technology and reliability. Just want to keep running slides. Let me quickly, and I know this is more of, you are more interested in management and how we, cost of electricity down there, but let me give you a quick slide on technology, what we are doing or what's being done. Again, I mentioned two things are technology imperatives. One is how do you harvest low wind speed sites, and second, how do you make sure you have reliability and availability at the best. You are kind of improving that every year. Yes.
I was actually waiting for this technology thing. We're actually currently working on a 4 megawatt windmill which removes the gearbox, and like our name says, it's being installed at the Great Lakes.
Okay.
So do you think that is viable in India? Because that would solve the land issue, because we have space for that.
No, that's a good point. See, that turbine is actually an offshore turbine. So it's not an onshore, but it's a direct drive offshore 4 megawatt turbine. For land, we have 1.6 megawatt and 2.75 megawatt. I think if you look at, and I don't have a slide unfortunately, if you look at how the wind turbine sizes are going to change, it is going to get bigger and bigger. But today, we can't bring the cost of such a big turbine down to compete with our smaller turbines. Today 1.6 megawatt turbine gives you the best cost of electricity. 4 megawatt has some of the best technologies, but the cost has not been, we need to work on bringing the cost down. So that is suitable for offshore because it has direct drive, it has better monitoring technologies, it has better.
But it's being installed in the lakes.
It's an offshore, yeah. It's a water turbine.
Yeah. So
to be installed. Yeah, we can bring it to land, but at the end of the day, a developer doesn't buy technology based on land availability. He will buy what gives him best cost of generation. So that is that challenge. 10 years from now, you will see 3 megawatt turbines being installed, 3-4 megawatt turbines being installed. Already we are seeing at least 5 or 6 global companies that are, I'm saying 5 or 6 global companies that have brought 2 to 2.5 megawatt turbines in India. Look at Siemens, 2.3 megawatt. Look at Gamesa, 2 megawatt. Vestas, 2 megawatt. GE has 2.75 or 1.6. So we have already gone from 800 kilowatt to 2 megawatt. And in 5 years from now, you will see 3 to 4, but it's not there yet.
Another question to digress to solar, since you've already taken. GE has been working on backward integration. Solar Thin, you've set up plants in Colorado and you've brought down the cost by 40%.
Correct.
But whereas you're aiming to actually reduce the installation cost as well, which is a huge thing. So do you think that would play a huge role in India where the installation cost is high? Maybe for rooftop, because if
yeah, I was just going to say, it is more that system installation cost, which is the latest news that we probably saw like 2 weeks ago, that is more focused on rooftops. Just like I am saying that in wind we will see in 5 years, we will move to larger turbines. In solar, we will see that transition from land-based, large-scale utility projects to rooftop-based utility or commercial projects. Because that's what happened in Germany. Germany started with utility-scale solar PV, and now majority of the projects happen on rooftop. And it makes perfect sense because rather than occupying the land, why not occupy roofs which are pretty much not useless, but which don't have other purposes. So I think that installation cost will come into play as we move towards rooftop. In general, installation cost in India is a little bit lower because the labor is cheaper. So the equipment piece becomes more highlighted. So the equipment piece has more impact in cost of generation in India.
And last question is, GE Aviation, for example, doesn't go into the the airlines part because it doesn't want to compete with its service providers. So, but GE Energy is setting up its own energy farms and wind farms. So, is that?
No, we don't have our own wind farms, but we sell products and services. So, we don't own any wind farms, but if you are a developer and if we sell you, let's say 50 megawatt of farm, we also offer you services. So, it's not, we don't own any of the wind farms. Energy financial services may have some equity or may have given debt to certain developers, so there may be some ownership. But Energy Financial Services acts as an independent company. They don't buy necessarily GE turbines. That makes sense. So in terms of technology, to get to to harvest low wind speed sites, you are going to go to longer rotors. So there is a lot of research going on across the world, but especially in India, to get to longer rotors. How do you transport them? How do you make them? How do you reduce the weight of these longer rotors? Because rotor goes from 40 meters to 50 meters. When I say rotor, I mean a blade. It goes from 40 to 50. The weight is going to go up. It's going to cause a lot of stress on the downstream components. How do you make sure that you can reduce the weight or improve the efficiency? And that's the second part also, energy capture. And then the third piece is controls. How do you, when the wind changes, you have to be able to change the direction of the blades, very quickly. There are a lot of new controls technologies that have been developed in last few years. So how do you include them in wind? In terms of reliability and availability, we have to make sure that the components are well tested. The big piece that you will hear about is when you have a wind turbine, and if it fails suddenly, again, I mentioned about availability, you don't want to lose the wind turbine. But if it fails suddenly, you have a lot more expense because you have not planned for a crane to be there. The turbine may be down for weeks. So it's called, that's an event of unplanned failure. We are strategizing how do you avoid unplanned failures, and everything should be planned maintenance. So if you have sensors that can tell you something is going wrong, then you can stop the turbine, hopefully at a low wind speed time zone, and you can do a maintenance. So it's a planned maintenance instead of unplanned failure. That's a big shift in philosophy, and you will see that across several companies. GE is, I would say, kind of taking the lead there. And the third piece is reliability and availability. There are some things not in your control, that are not part of your turbine, but as part of grid that may trip your turbine. So how do you make your turbine more robust so it can deal with weak grids? So these are some of the things we are doing on technology. I'll skip this slide, just saying that 2002 is when we acquired wind energy division from Enron, and between 2002 and 2010, these are the kind of improvements that we made. We improved the energy production from the same turbine by 100%, close to 100%. So all the efficiency. We have improved what is called capacity factor by 16%, and availability. The turbine used to be not available 15% of the time. Now it is not available only 2% of the time. So these are the kind of improvements. And again, focus on services. I talked about asset management, which is putting a sensor and getting advanced warnings of anything that's going to go wrong. Operation and maintenance, services that we do, and there are certain technologies that we have. That's why we prefer if we do services for our products. And then performance optimization. How do you, a wind turbine, once you install it, there is some other things might come around the wind turbine, or things might change. How do you optimize the performance while you are installing it, as well as once it is installed? How do you maximize the performance of the farm? This is, again, this is a shift in terms of thinking. People are no more thinking wind turbines as you install and forget about it. This is an asset that you have to own, maintain, optimize. Quickly on solar, I think these are the last two slides. So on solar, I talked about wind. What are the policy instruments? On solar, the policy instruments, clearly feed-in tariff was a big one. They set feed-in tariff in the second round of first phase. They went to reverse bidding, where the ceiling was set, and you had a choice of what you want to bid to build the project. Renewable purchase obligation and certificates are same as wind, but if you haven't followed, first solar project got accredited for REC registration. So this is again a big step. There are 2 gigawatt of wind that has been accredited. 2 gigawatt projects of wind have signed up for REC. First solar project signed up in Jalgaon, Maharashtra. And then the third piece of policy intervention we are doing is local content requirement. Crystalline silicon modules have to be made locally. We can debate on whether that's the right move or whether it violates WTO, it doesn't violate WTO, whether it's good move for India, not good move for developers. We can debate that, but it's an intervention that Indian government decided was necessary. In terms of technology, I'll focus on thin film because not because GE is doing thin film, but because if you look at the Indian environment, thin films are better modules. So you will see more installations coming from thin films. And inverters, which is one component, but it's a big one for maintaining that grid stability, grid interaction. This is just one quick slide on where GE is. GE has two different products of thin films: the copper indium gallium selenide, cadmium telluride. Again, focus on compared to crystalline silicon, you have to have higher yield, you have to have competing or better cost of electricity, you have to have low balance of system or installation costs, and long-term reliability. 25 years, you should be predictable. It's not that the modules should not degrade, but there has to be predictability. You should be able to predict how much will they degrade? 5%, half a point or 0.5%, 1%. You should have a predictability. So in summary, I hope I have kind of got the point across that renewable energy is the key for India. The two big drivers that we have that we can use effectively are policy and technology development. And I really believe that generation-based incentives or generation-based policies that we have in place, as well as renewable purchase obligations, will really drive this forward. So with that, thank you very much. I think you have been great audience. I don't know if it's because I bored you or you are just very attentive. Thank you very much. Solar you're talking about. What distribution? I think transmission and distribution is a big business. And as I mentioned, just a month ago, we created an entire vertical for energy management. We also acquired a company called Converting, which is a French company. It's a $3 billion company that we acquired. India, they are based out of Chennai in India. So we are getting into that. I'm not part of that business, so I don't know, partnerships. That will be unfair for me to even speculate. So, but I think it is important, and I know as much focus as we have on renewable energy, wind, solar services, and financial services, we have on transmission and distribution. So I think you will hear or see something soon.
Second question, related to Jawaharlal Nehru Solar National Solar Mission. What is the GE strategy? Because GE is the leader in the solar technology. So what is the GE strategy in this expansion?
No, that's a very good point. We are not the leader in thin film. First Solar is the leader in thin film. But again, our focus, what gives us leverage is, we can think through, whether you look at First Solar in solar or Vestas in wind, they have one business that they focus on. Whereas, fortunately, we have several businesses that we can leverage. So whether it's policy advocacy, we can take advantage of our position in other businesses. So we are, again, for thin films, we are focusing on how do we localize the product. What customization do we need to do for India? Second, our focus is also on levelized cost of electricity. So we don't just have thin films. Again, don't take it as I'm not bad mouthing First Solar. It is their strategy. I think they are, market leaders worldwide. So they are doing it very well. But our strategy is, we are not only in thin films, we also have inverter products, we also have DC balance of system. So our approach is how do we bring down the total system cost for the developer? Where all can we help? So I would say in terms of solar, we are in the beginning phases. We are talking to several customers, both EPCs, as well as developers. You should see something, again, soon. But our focus is always going to be cost of electricity, cost of generation, and how do we scale up. So, not small projects or not one-off projects, but strategic relationships like we have in wind with companies, IPPs like Greenco. If you go and Google Green, you'll see some. So we like that, where we have mutual trust, mutual relationship.
I have a question here.
Sorry.
Like you talked that financial institutions are reluctant in giving loans because of the crisis that happened in US. So that was a financial bubble burst where the financial sector was in problems because of the kind of instruments they had. In India, when you look at it, first taking the distribution sector, distribution is incurring huge losses. So as we have seen, like India has deregulated the generation side of it, that is the supply side of it, but the demand side, that is the distribution and transmission, is still regulated.
Yes.
So the companies that we have in distribution, they are running into big time losses, right? And similarly, we are concentrating on just boosting our generation. There is a big loss going on here, and we are concentrating on boosting our generation, where 70% is again low. The projects that happen, 70% are based on low. Okay, now these projects, again we can see the fuel prices going up. Many companies backing off from the projects they were to make. So seeing this climate, don't you think we are also sitting on a kind of a ticking time bomb that is indirectly going to affect the financial system as well and take the whole system down?
That's a great point. I don't know if you have seen today's Economic Times. It doesn't talk about renewable energy, but it talks about power sector, and a lot of financial institutions have over leverage. To be honest, distribution reforms, have to happen, and they will happen. I think India is looking at transmission and distribution in a very serious way. We have been involved in 12th plan recommendations. I know a lot of activities going on in transmission and distribution. But I don't think there is a bubble, at least from my perspective. I think Indian banks, especially if you look at private sector lenders, they are very cautious. It is almost the other end, where they are not ready to finance solar projects because they don't have, long enough track record. If a developer tells them that my degradation is only going to be 1%, they always question the developer. Why do you say it's only 1%? Who says that if you are promising me, 4 million units, who says that it won't be 2 million instead of 4 million? Show me your track record, how this has worked. Show me a project that you have built close to equator. Show me a project that you have built in a dusty environment. So our lenders, I think, are very cautious, and I think it's the right approach. So that gives me some confidence that there will not be a bubble per se. It will probably be, the distribution reforms are necessary, and I think the financing has to be actually faster. Because if you look at power evacuation challenges, Tamil Nadu is the only state so far that is facing challenges. Other states, especially Gujarat, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, are ready to, have the ability to transmit. So I don't think it's going to be, if the reforms don't happen, I think what you are saying may become true.
No, my point is, already we are close to a, end. The kind of losses that utilities have currently is huge enough.
No, 70% loss, in some cases, a huge amount of losses.
Yeah, nearly 70,000 crores is losses that they have. Again, a recent report by Crystal stated that the tariffs need to go up by at least 50% if you need to take them out of the losses.
You're talking about state utilities and how they will deal with all
because
this.
that is the
Understood. Okay.
that is the demand side, right? And if the demand side is not functioning, how can you even?
No, but if you look at National Solar Mission, they are going to bundle the power. So government has encouraged, NVDN is going to bundle the power. The burden will be passed on to the consumers. It will not be a lot of burden. I think it's like 2 paise burden on the consumer. So, utilities will not, it's a pass through. For wind, they have to announce certain FIT, but now, if you see, I think REC and RPO will kind of take over. It's a market-based instrument. Again, utilities will not have to suffer. Right now, they have to pay more to buy wind, but you're looking at 4%. I think there's a paper by Dr. Pramod Dev on CRC. I think it will be on CRC website, which actually calculates what is the burden on utility and burden on end customer. You should read that. It's not as significant as you see on the thermal side, where fuel prices variation is huge. There are a lot of uncertainties. In case of renewable, it's not as bad. Especially once if they can enforce the RPO, I think they will be better off, because then lot of customers will go for REC.
So is GE trying to get there?
Yeah, we definitely are advocating that. I mean, if you, I can't share unfortunately the position paper, but if you look at our recommendations, position papers, we always, enforcement is number one thing. You know that the policies are very good. Enforcement is important.
So still, the developers are not very keen to go under REC scheme for solar because
Solar,
because the prices of your RECs are not, they are only for a control period for 5 years. For again, you cannot project your cash flows.
yeah, but you will be surprised that, as I mentioned, 2 gigawatt of wind have signed up with REC. That's a big number. Again, wind also has only 5-year time window. I mean, time window is just taken line of sight. I think there is every reason to believe that that will continue. If you do a captive, if a wind developer today does a captive sale, sells to an industrial consumer and gets an REC, his revenue is twice the amount of PPA that he's going to sign up. So if you get such a big jump in the first 5 years, and then let's say you go down a little bit, your overall 20-year financial will still look better, cash flow.
I've got 2 questions. One is personal nature. What made you to shift from the research field, which you have done a PhD in working on aviation, towards the marketing field? What made you to shift?
I always wanted to be, when I did my BTech, I was very interested in engineering, product development. So I did my PhD. But even when I was doing my PhD, I was very interested in the business side of things. But when I joined GE, I was working closely with businesses. I was working with marketing people because marketing people will kind of sense the market, tell us about what products need to be developed, and I was involved in product development. It was just pure personal interest that I thought, I should be on the other side of the table. I can probably add more value. And as you mature, I think you can guide your engineering teams better if you understand the product development side of things. I'm fortunately able to speak language of business as well as engineering. So I am able to communicate better with our engineering teams. So I thought that will be an advantage. And I mean, you probably are seeing it. There are a lot of techno-commercial roles that are opening up. So you don't have to make a choice between completely being in a business or engineering. There are roles where you can be the bridge. And that's what I wanted to do. So.
And the second question is what are the challenges you are facing in marketing the new products in the wind and solar sector in the coming future? New products which are talking about 4 megawatt wind turbine.
That's a great point because GE is a big company globally, but in renewable energy, all companies have to be local. So you have to have track record locally, you have to have customers relationship locally, you have to have suppliers locally. Because otherwise your cost position is going to be, very high. You are not going to be able to sell your product. So infrastructure companies, no matter how famous they are globally, they have to be local companies. So that's the biggest challenge I think GE faces, or Siemens faces, anybody faces, or Indian companies when they go abroad, they will face. It's how do you become a local company in that geography? How do you create that track record, customer relationships, cost position, policy influence? So I think it's a big challenge. I'll just add one more thing. So you will see that's why GE has set up in India as a profit and loss center. We have a GE India CEO, John Flannery, who sits probably 2 kilometers from here. So that's the whole point of Jeff Immelt saying, I need India as a profit and loss. I don't want New York or Connecticut driving Indian strategy. I want marketing people in India, sourcing people in India, engineering people in India, and a CEO in India to lead.
Mithun, allow me to ask you a question that is of tremendous interest to me and my colleagues here. Well,
no, it doesn't get me in trouble.
well, looking at your profile and GE as a whole, we don't see much, that you're facing severe lack of skilled managers as such. But still, hope that's not true. What are you looking for in a potential candidate as a manager in us as Great Lakes students as well, if you're planning to hire here, that you don't find in any other B schools? What particular skill sets are you looking for in special?
You know, I'll give a little bit of personal twist to the answer. GE could have hired, you know, MBAs from Harvard, or they didn't need to promote me to a marketing role. So we don't necessarily look for, you know, where you come from, you know, what degree. You know, it probably is a good point for an entry, but it is really what is your personal initiative. You know, are you passionate about what you are doing, and can you motivate others? So that's a leadership skill. You know, personal. When I say initiative, you know, in GE we have traits that we evaluate people by. One is clear thinking. Can you think clearly? You know, this is a complex problem. You are in a new geography. You have, you know, fairly strong local competitors. How will you solve that problem? So do you have that problem solving, clear thinking mentality? The second trait is external focus. Are you able to look externally rather than looking internally within the company? Are you able to take external input? Are you, you know, the leadership I mentioned about, the fourth one is expertise. Are you able to, you know, are you domain experts? Can you develop domain expertise? Not everybody is going to be domain expert on day one, but 1 year from when you start. So we actually evaluate candidates on these traits when they come for interview or when they come for internships. And to your point, it's not that we have a lot of, you know, John Flannery has said this publicly, but we are looking for like 1,000 plus sales and marketing people in India for across businesses, not just energy, across businesses. So, you know, when you look at the size of the business, the size of the investments, I think it's the manpower shortage is probably, I would say, #1 challenge. People who can, but it's not anybody, right? It's people who can meet these criteria. So you are getting great education, you know, courses, you are learning a lot of frameworks, 5 courses, you know, SWOT analysis, but it's how do you apply? When you read a newspaper, do you step back and say, how would I have solved this problem? You know, when I'm reading this, what are the things between the lines that I'm not reading? You know, who else could come into this picture? You know, let's say airplane business will get, or business class in air industry, do they feel threatened by WebEx? Because now a lot of meetings can happen over the internet. Can you think, you know, beyond your immediate, what, you know, if I had 100% of the information, probably GE wouldn't have hired me. It is because I have only 20% of the information and still I have to solve the problem. That's where GE needs, you know, good people. So education is one thing, you know, qualifications, courses is one thing. It's really the other aspects that you can develop, and that's where I think you will differentiate from. No, it doesn't matter if it's ISB or, you know, Harvard. It doesn't matter. I mean, Jack Welch was a PhD. You know, he didn't have any business degree, but it's not where you come from. It's how you apply. So, and there are opportunities in GE. You know, I'm going to follow up later on, but you know, hopefully there'll be engagement. So.
Sir, I would just like to know, Chief Technical Advisor to Vijay Govindarajan often talks about reverse innovation. Could you just tell what it is? Is it the way forward for the global MNCs to replicate that model? Or what GE Energy is doing?
Yeah. First of all, Vijay Govindarajan was a professor in residence, not chief. He was not a technology person.
I read somewhere that he took 1 year off.
Yeah. So he was with GE. He's no more in that assignment. We have a new person. I forget his name. I'm sorry. But you know, I think India P&L happened because of Vijay Govindarajan. So reverse innovation basically talks about, can GE, being a global company, compete with Suzlon in India? And that's where I talked about infrastructure companies have to be local. So that was the question that they were trying to solve. So we have to do innovation in those geographies, and if it is very successful, it can be exported to other parts of the world. And one example was the handheld sort of CT that GE developed, which was developed purely for India. And they developed it, again, it's called frugal innovation. That's kind of the theme, where you need minimum things. You know, when you go to a rural area, you don't need 50 buttons on a CT. You just need, few things that the doctor will understand, the patient will be comfortable with. So they looked at, where can I get the printer from? So I think they went to a bus. They took the bus conductor, he has that printer. They took that printer, they used that. So it was like a frugal innovation. That product was so successful that now it's being applied all across the world because it is like 1/10 or 1/5 of the cost. So can we do nano? It doesn't have to be only GE. There are other examples. Nano is a great example of frugal innovation. What do you need? Basic needs. $2,000 car. So I'm saying that is reverse innovation. You develop something for the local geography rather than bringing a product and customizing it. And then, I would say infrastructure business, it is harder. Wind turbine, you will not be able to change the entire thing very quickly. Yes, over a period of time, you may be able to come up with something very unique to India or solar. But generally, infrastructure businesses is a little hard. Consumer industrial, or that is somewhat easier. But I think it is a way for the future for GE. We have India as the PNL, Germany as the PNL. We are looking at creating other PNLs across the world. We have Vice Chairman of GE, who is second in line to Jeffrey Meld, John Rice. He now has moved from US to Hong Kong, and he leads Global Growth Organization. So he will have all these global PNLs. So it is definitely way forward for GE.
Sir, I have a question relating to your wind energy business.
Sure.
So I believe that the material they use for the blades, that is like pretty important for future R&D.
Yes.
And I've heard that for this 1.5 megawatt to 2 megawatt range, your turbines, you use fiberglass.
Correct. FRP.
So are they using other materials for lower capacity and higher capacity turbines?
FRP, fiberglass reinforced, that is pretty much the standard for low wind, for 1.5 megawatt type turbines. I think as you go higher, it's not so much the megawattage, but it's the larger blades. When you start going to larger blades, you have to really be conscious about weight. So I think some companies, including GE, are looking at carbon fiber, because carbon is lighter than glass. So carbon fiber is becoming very important. I'm sure there are other, this is all now composite, composite materials are much lighter. So again, GE has we are fortunate to have aviation business, which is going through same issues, right? Because an engine, you have to reduce the weight to minimum, because that really impacts your fuel efficiency, operational expenses. So we are using those kinds of technologies that are developed in aviation business, in our wind business.
So my question is not pertaining to renewable sector, but to gas-based generation. Is it okay with you?
Yeah. I may not be able to answer, but it's okay to ask questions.
How do you see gas engines promoting to electricity generation in a bigger capacity? If you
Biogas engines?
no, not gas engines.
Gas turbines.
Compare it with when you compare it with gas turbines.
So you are saying like natural gas fired?
Is it turbines or engines?
See, in thermal, that's why I'm kind of getting the clarification. In thermal, we have gas turbines, which are these, big turbines connected to steam, then to generator, which drive, UMP, like UMPP, large scale power plant. When I say gas engines, those are more based on biogas, where we are using, things like coconut husks, or, rice husks, coconut shells, things like that to, so if your question is more about
CCGT.
yeah. So CCGT, I think the bigger problem is the availability of natural gas. The availability of natural gas is very, very uncertain right now. This is probably one of the worst years that, and if you again, there is an article, I don't know if it is Economic Times or Deccan Herald, there is an article today on availability of natural gas and how that is really going through a low period right now. And in next 15 years or so, we'll need double the natural gas that we need today. And we don't have that line of sight. So we are getting some LNG from Qatar and from other places, but it's really, the KG6 basin has to produce more. You have to have more find, but natural gas is going to be a big problem. And coal, again, domestic coal, the quality is poor. You need to have imported coal and things like that. So thermal business in India today is a little bit uncertain, I would say. But it's going to, again, that is the base power solution. So the government will have to fix it, and I know they're working on it. So
why I asked this question is because we did a research project in Tamil Nadu where there were different plants of different technologies.
yes.
So when we carried out the research analysis, the gas engines proved to be better compared to gas turbines.
Maybe we can talk offline. I will have to look at the data, but that's possible because again it's
Because
gas
gas
uncertainty.
engines are not being seen that much in gas generations. The more
See,
generations.
when you say gas engines, and if you're talking about Wärtsilä, Cummins, GE, that type of gas engines, the big problem there is, again, if they are natural gas fired, there is no natural gas. If they are biogas fired, then the fuel collection methods are very, I would say, unorganized, or there is no.
One more point I want to add, because of the gas, there is no gas. Now these turbines and engines work on part loads.
Yes.
The efficiencies of engines at part load is better
Is better, correct.
compared to.
That's true. Same. So GE has recently launched. If you can Google Flex 50, Flex as in flexibility 50. That's a new turbine that GE has launched and is now available in India as well. And it's really designed towards maximizing part load efficiency, because that's what we are seeing in India and countries like India. Is the part load efficiency is much more important than base load efficiency, where you are 100% loaded.
But Flex 50 is also trying to incorporate solar as well.
Yeah, but that's a separate thing. Flex 50 by itself
61%.
is designed for part load, 61, 62.
But how do we incorporate solar? What is the purpose of having, so is it to offset the?
Correct. See, this is going to be a trend, because storage is very important, and we don't have battery technology to a point where it is cost effective. So gas turbine or aeroderivatives in conjunction with solar or wind is a trend, because when you at the end of the day, from a power plant, you want reliability, that you are going to pump in so many million units. If solar is available or wind is available, you will dispatch them first, because there is no OPEX. But when they are not available, you need to have a backup. So it is that kind of design that is driving the hybrid power plant.
So talking about solar energy, as GE is also in R&D, so solar energy have only 18 to 20% efficiency.
Correct.
So how do you
Not
see
efficiency, but efficiency or yield?
the efficiency of
Okay.
So how do you see the future that efficiency can increase? Because efficiency is the main challenge what the solar energy is facing all over across the world. So where GE see themselves to improve the efficiency?
See, I just want to differentiate between efficiency and yield. Efficiency tells you how many panels do you need to put together 1 megawatt plant. So if you have high efficiency, you need fewer panels. Efficiency of thin film, just to give you an idea, is 12%. Efficiency of crystalline silicon is 18%. So that's efficiency. Yield means from a 1 megawatt power plant, how many megawatt hours do you get? So I think crystalline silicon is 20%, thin film maybe 22%. So there thin film has an advantage. So if you're talking about efficiency, there is a lot of work going on how do you extract more energy out of the same incident light. This is a R&D type of activity. What layers do you need? What type of thin film, additives can you add to get maximum? So that work is definitely going on. We think thin film, I don't have numbers, but thin film cost of generation will come down considerably. I think even Indian government is saying by 2017 or 2020 they will be at the same level as wind. So I think it's possible. In terms of yield also, there is a lot of work going on. How do you improve yield from the same but then there is certain amount of entitlement that you will not be able to cross. So it is both efficiency and yield that you'll have to improve.
Sir, as you said, project financing is a what exactly they doing?
See, first of all, what we do is we go to lot of lenders with our customers and we explain to them GE products, how GE products have worked globally, why the risk is not there, or how risk is controlled. Let me put it that way. So we give confidence to the lenders. So that's one activity. Second activity is Energy Financial Services actually puts in equity or debt in some projects to make projects viable. So that is the second activity. Third, third probably is not as common. GE develops projects. We have an arm called Global Development and Strategic Initiatives, which also develops projects. But that's not as common. We do it only in sort of new markets where we want to get in and we don't have any other channel. We will kind of develop one project as a key prototype project. So that's sort of what those are the areas we. At the end of the day, if you are a lender and you are lending to a renewable energy project, what you want to see is predictability of the cash flow. The developer will give you a 20-year cash flow. As a lender, you are making sure that it's within plus or minus X%. So as long as OEMs and we can give them confidence, they are either confidence through technology discussions or confidence through putting in our own money. That sort of gives them. No. We don't do guarantee. Nobody does. So nobody will give you guarantee for wind or solar. What you get is power curve guarantee. That if there is so much sun, you will get so much power. But whether there is so much sun is not. We are not going to guarantee. Nobody will, because it's pure. Many times. Who knows 20 years what's going to happen.
I'd like to thank Nitin on behalf of the entire IMA community. I think it was, in fact, you guys should know that Nitin is actually not based out of Gurgaon. He's based out of Bangalore. And he's come to Gurgaon for an official visit, so I think it was very kind of him to spare a couple of hours for us. And in fact, more than a couple of hours, I think, with the questions. So, thank you so much. I hope it was as enjoyable to you as it was to us.
Definitely.
And we look forward to hosting you.
Same here.
This is a small memento from our side.
Thank you very much. If you have any other questions, I'll leave my contact information. LinkedIn.
No vote of thanks?